On December 4, 1872, the British brigantine Dei Gratia was sailing the vast, lonely waters of the Atlantic, roughly halfway between the Azores and Portugal. The captain, David Morehouse, spotted a ship behaving strangely in the distance. It was a brigantine, clearly sailing, but something was wrong. Its sails were strangely set, and its movements were erratic. As they drew closer, Captain Morehouse and his first mate, Oliver Deveau, realized the ship was the Mary Celeste. Morehouse knew her well. In fact, he knew her captain, Benjamin Briggs, personally. Briggs and his entire crew were friends of his. But as they hailed the Mary Celeste, there was no answer. The ship was sailing, fully rigged, yet completely silent. When Deveau and 2 crewmen boarded her, what they found defied logic. The ship was structurally sound. It was well stocked with 6 months of provisions. The cargo, 96% proof raw alcohol, was secure in the hold. There was no sign of a struggle, no obvious damage from a storm, and no blood. Yet, the 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste, Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 experienced crewmen had vanished. The beds were made. There was food on the table. A sewing machine, containing Sarah Briggs's half-finished work, was still sitting out. The ship's papers, except for the logbook, were gone. The last entry in the log was dated 10 days earlier, November 25, placing the ship just 400 miles away. What happened in those 10 days? Where did the entire crew go, and why did they abandon a perfectly seaworthy vessel? This is the story of the Mary Celeste, the ghost ship found sailing alone, the greatest maritime mystery in history, and the terrifying, plausible theories that explain the crew's sudden disappearance. This is the story of the Mary Celeste, the ghost ship found sailing alone, the greatest maritime mystery in history, and the terrifying, plausible theories that explain the crew's sudden disappearance. The Mary Celeste began its life as the Amazon in 1861, built in Nova Scotia. The ship was beautiful but seemed to carry a dark cloud from day one. Her very first captain became ill and died before the ship even left the harbor on its maiden voyage. This set the stage for a series of misfortunes. The ship ran into another vessel, was damaged by fire, and even wrecked briefly off the coast of New Jersey. By the time it was purchased by an American, rebuilt, and renamed the Mary Celeste in 1868, sailors already whispered the word jinxed. Despite this reputation, the ship's captain, Benjamin Briggs, was anything but unlucky. Briggs was a deeply pious, highly respected, and experienced New England mariner. He was a man known for discipline, sobriety, and excellent seamanship. He would never abandon his vessel lightly. The final, fateful voyage began on November 7, 1872, sailing from Staten Island, New York, bound for Genoa, Italy. The cargo was 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, a highly flammable and valuable product. Captain Briggs was not alone. His wife, Sarah Briggs, a well-educated woman who kept an impeccable diary, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, were also aboard. This was not unusual for American captains in the era, but it adds a heartbreaking layer to the mystery. The crew was small but qualified, a German first mate named Albert Richardson, a Danish second mate named Andrew Gilling, and 4 experienced European sailors. In total, 10 souls were aboard. The ship's last confirmed location was recorded on November 25, in the logbook found in the ship's cabin. The entry simply recorded the weather and the ship's position, west of the Azores. 11 days later, the Mary Celeste was discovered. The Dei Gratia crew, led by Captain Morehouse, quickly determined that something had gone terribly wrong, yet nothing made sense. The lifeboat was missing, suggesting an organized abandonment. But if they organized an evacuation, why did they leave behind their 6 months of food, their money, and the most vital tool for navigation, the sextant? Why leave a ship that was barely taking on water and was perfectly able to sail? The evidence suggested a sudden, overwhelming panic. First mate Oliver Deveau and his men spent hours meticulously cataloging the state of the Mary Celeste. The details were crucial, and they only deepened the mystery. 1. The missing instruments. The ship's chronometer, a highly valuable timekeeping device for navigation, was missing, as was the sextant. This confirmed the officers intended to navigate, suggesting they left in a hurry but expected to survive. Crucially, the ship's papers were also missing, but the logbook remained. The state of the cabin was the most unsettling area. Sarah Briggs's sewing machine sat unused. A half-eaten meal, some historians say eggs, others say a stew, was on the table. The captain's bed had an indentation, as if someone had just risen from it. In the child's cabin, the bed was made. This suggests an abandonment during the daytime, likely while the crew was performing normal, domestic duties. The broken equipment. The ship's pump was still in working order. However, the forehatch, a main opening to the forward hold, was secured, but the main cargo hatch was slightly ajar. The cargo, All 1,701 barrels of alcohol were present, but a handful were found empty. More importantly, when later examined in Genoa, 9 barrels were found to be completely missing, though the cargo hold showed no sign of a leak or rupture. This detail is essential for several theories. The missing lifeboat: only one piece of equipment was missing, the ship's largest boat, a 10-oared lifeboat known as the gig. It was clear the crew did not sink, they evacuated. But why? The sword, perhaps the most dramatic, and often exaggerated, piece of evidence was found in the captain's cabin. A sword, likely a ceremonial piece, was found lying out of its sheath, resting on the floor. Some claimed the sword had blood on it, suggesting a mutiny, but later investigations found no human blood anywhere on the ship. The sword being out of place simply suggested someone moved something in a panic. Deveau and the Dei Gratia crew, following maritime law, took possession of the derelict ship. Deveau, with 2 of his men, sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, a feat of seamanship given the state of the sails and the lack of proper instruments. The subsequent salvage hearing in Gibraltar became a circus. The Vice Admiralty Court was immediately suspicious, believing Captain Morehouse and Deveau were attempting an insurance fraud scheme. They theorized that the 2 captains, who were friends, had conspired. Morehouse would kill or hide the crew and claim the lucrative salvage prize. The prosecutor, Frederick Solly Flood, was convinced of foul play. He focused on the sword and claimed to see bloodstains on the deck. However, after extensive and professional scrutiny, the claim of blood was dismissed. The court was forced to accept the bizarre truth: the ship was sound, the crew was gone, and there was no evidence of violence. Morehouse and Deveau were eventually awarded the salvage payment, though it was a reduced amount due to the lingering suspicion. With no sign of attack, mutiny, or structural damage, investigators in the decades that followed focused on the ship's cargo: 1,701 barrels of 96% pure industrial alcohol. This highly volatile cargo provides the most rational, if terrifying, explanation for the sudden abandonment. This theory hinges on 2 facts: the main cargo hatch was ajar, and 9 barrels of alcohol were eventually found to be empty. The chain of events: pressure buildup, the intense heat during the crossing, combined with the normal fermentation process, would have caused significant pressure to build inside the barrels. These barrels were made of red oak, known to be slightly porous. The pressure would have forced alcohol fumes, highly toxic, invisible, and odorless, to seep out of the barrels. The fumes in the hatch: the ajar main hatch allowed these fumes to rise and concentrate in the forward hold, close to the crew's quarters. The crew would have been unaware of the odorless, flammable gas filling the lower parts of the ship. The explosion, or flash fire at some point, on or around November 25, a small, contained explosion or a sudden flash fire occurred, likely triggered by a spark from a galley fire or a lantern. Crucially, this would not have been a massive, structurally damaging explosion. It would have been a deflagration, a rapid, low-velocity burn that produces a brief, terrifying blast of flame and heat, but leaves behind almost no evidence of soot, scorch marks, or structural damage. The panic: imagine Captain Briggs and his crew hearing a sudden, deafening WUMPH sound from the cargo hold. A momentary rush of heat and a blast of invisible, noxious gas may have erupted through the ajar hatch. Briggs's immediate thought would have been catastrophe: the entire ship, carrying 1,700 more barrels of high-proof alcohol, was about to detonate. The abandonment protocol: Briggs, faced with what he believed was an imminent, fiery end, would have instantly initiated the emergency protocol. His priority would have been to save his wife, daughter, and crew. He would have ordered the gig, the lifeboat, lowered and the crew to transfer to it, taking only the absolute essentials, the sextant and the ship's log to record their fate. The fatal mistake: they would have lashed the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste with a long rope, intending to wait for the expected massive explosion. The assumption was that the ship would burn and sink, and they would cut the rope and drift to safety after the danger passed. But the massive explosion never came. The initial deflagration released the pressure and consumed the initial pocket of gas, leaving the remaining cargo safe. The severed line: while trailing the Mary Celeste in the lifeboat, one of 2 things happened: either a sudden swell caused the lifeboat line to snap, or the line was deliberately cut, perhaps because the Mary Celeste, now sailing without anyone at the wheel, gained speed and began dragging the small boat dangerously. They would have been left adrift in the middle of the Atlantic, watching the Mary Celeste, their only hope, sail silently away. This theory explains every detail: the missing lifeboat, the missing navigation instruments, the intact ship, the ajar hatch, and the absolute lack of struggle. They were victims of extreme, understandable panic based on a catastrophic, but brief, misjudgment about their cargo. While the alcohol fume theory is the most scientifically sound, the unsettling nature of the mystery has inspired several wilder, often thrilling, alternatives. The mutiny and pirate attack theory. This theory was popular immediately after the discovery. It suggests that the crew, perhaps under the influence of alcohol, turned against the captain, or that the ship was boarded by pirates. The argument, the missing sword, the scattered items, and the quick abandonment suggest violence. The refutation, there was no blood, no body, and no sign of struggle on the deck or in the cabins. Pirates would have taken the valuable alcohol cargo, the chronometer, and any money, yet they left the bulk of the valuables and the entire cargo intact. The ship's condition was inconsistent with a violent takeover. The sea monster or giant squid theory. This theory, born largely from sensational Victorian newspaper accounts, posits that a massive sea creature, perhaps a giant squid, attacked the ship, terrifying the crew into the lifeboat. The argument, the deep-sea environment and the crew's frantic decision to leave suggest an external threat far larger than human. The refutation, a creature large enough to frighten 10 hardened sailors would have left obvious physical damage to the wooden hull, which was found to be structurally sound. Furthermore, while the sea can be terrifying, experienced sailors know a lifeboat is far more dangerous than staying aboard a secure vessel. The waterspout theory. This theory suggests the Mary Celeste was suddenly hit by a waterspout, a tornado over water. The argument, a violent waterspout could have swept the entire crew off the deck in a matter of seconds, leaving the ship sailing but empty. The refutation, while waterspouts are possible, the sails and rigging were only moderately damaged, certainly not in a state consistent with having endured a direct tornado-like strike. More importantly, the missing lifeboat suggests a deliberate, ordered evacuation, not an instantaneous accident. If they had been swept away, the lifeboat would have been found secured on the deck. The ergot poisoning theory. This fringe theory suggests the crew may have been poisoned by ergot, a fungus found on rye and other grains, which causes severe hallucinations and can lead to irrational panic and violent behavior. Ergot is the chemical basis for LSD. The argument, the ship was carrying foodstuffs, and contamination could have occurred, causing 10 people to suddenly descend into psychosis and abandon the ship in an irrational frenzy. The refutation, while medically possible, there is no evidence the ship was carrying rye or contaminated food. More importantly, even in a state of delusion, a captain as seasoned as Briggs would likely have been the last one to succumb, and the structured abandonment, taking the lifeboat, the Sextant, is too organized for a simultaneous, mass hallucination. The Mary Celeste mystery, far from being solved, was amplified and distorted by literature. The most famous embellishment came just a decade later from none other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. In 1884, Doyle published a short story titled J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. He changed the ship's name to the Mary Celeste, a common misspelling that persists today, and spun a dramatic, fictional tale of a mentally unbalanced passenger who, after a religious dispute, hijacks the ship and throws the entire crew overboard. Doyle's story was so widely read and compelling that it was instantly confused with the truth. For decades, many believed the fictional account of the psycho passenger and the brutal murder was the factual truth of the Mary Celeste. This single piece of fiction cemented the ship's place in popular culture as the ultimate ghost ship. The Mary Celeste itself continued its troubled existence. It was sold and resold several times after the salvage hearing. Each new owner seemed to encounter bad luck and financial ruin. In 1885, its final captain, a man named G.W. Gilman, deliberately wrecked the ship off the coast of Haiti in an attempt to commit insurance fraud. The scheme was discovered, and Gilman was convicted, but the Mary Celeste was truly finished. Its remains lie scattered in the shallow waters near Port-au-Prince. In a final, morbid twist of fate, the ship that became famous for its abandoned crew was ultimately destroyed in an act of greed and conspiracy, fulfilling the sinister reputation that followed it for years. The mystery of the Mary Celeste is so compelling precisely because the evidence is so clear, yet the conclusion is so unsettling. We know where the ship was, what was on it, and what was missing. We know the captain was reliable, and the crew was experienced. Despite all the wild theories, the evidence points overwhelmingly to the alcohol fume theory. Captain Briggs and his crew were not killed by a mutiny or a monster. They were forced into a moment of pure, blinding terror by a gas cloud and a small, non-lethal explosion. They acted rationally in the face of what they perceived as certain death, only to be betrayed by the relentless, indifferent nature of the Atlantic Ocean. The final fate of Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their child Sophia, and the 7 crewmen remains unwritten. They were never seen again. They simply vanished. Did they drift for days, perhaps seeing their own ship sail away in the distance? Did they face starvation, exposure, or did their small boat finally capsize in a rogue wave? We will never know. The sea kept its secret, leaving behind only the ghost of a vessel sailing perfectly, yet forever empty, a chilling reminder that sometimes, the most profound tragedy is born not of violence, but of a catastrophic misunderstanding. The Mary Celeste remains the perfect definition of a mystery, a story where the ship survives, but the crew does not.